Reading from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. If you'd like to follow along with me, you can, or you can look at the bulletin cover. Please. I work hard on these things. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did it for one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me any clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." And then they will also answer, "Well, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" And then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it for one of the least of these, then you did not do so for me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Thus ends the reading of the word. So, last week, I preached on the parable of the talents. And I preached on it as Jesus' final parable and final instruction given to his disciples, those who were to carry on in his stead. Now, this judgment of the nation's speech is not called a parable, but it has elements of being parabolic, that is, topsy-turvy in its message. I want to say at the outset that this story is not about sheep and goats. I think they are being treated somewhat unfairly. It is Matthew's treatise on what he sees as the final reckoning and the cost of human behavior. Now, scholars disagree on who the term "the nations" refers to. Some say everybody, and some say pagans/Gentiles who have not been converted yet to following Christ by the day of judgment. I will say more about that a bit later. First, though, a bit about the main characters in Matthew's story. In the time of Matthew, and probably today, shepherds separated sheep and goats at the end of their time of grazing, at the end of their grazing day. If shepherds herded both animals, both sheep and goats, both sheep and goats then roamed in the pastures together in the daytime and were separated at night. So the image of separating them was not unfamiliar to any of Jesus' followers who grew up around sheep. That's funny. and goats or who was a member of the 4-H club. To the rest of us, not so much. I don't know if Matthew had any sheep or goat herding experience, and I know that you are dying to ask me why the sheep and the goats were separated at night. And I promise I'm going to tell you in just a minute. If Matthew were here, he might be telling me to get to the point and not spend any more time talking about sheep and goats. But Matthew isn't here, and since he decided to make sheep and goats symbols of humankind, I thought, for my own benefit, to learn a bit about sheep and goats. And maybe even discover the reason for separating them in the first place. I mean, for all I know, they didn't get along after dark. Do you know? If you do, don't say it. Thanks to the North Carolina State University's College of Agriculture and Life Science, I learned a little bit about the habits of these two four-legged, hoofed ruminators. Goats first. They're very active foragers. They prefer to forage on rough, steep land rather than graze on flat, smooth land. They would graze along a fence line rather than grazing in the center of a pasture. Now, I think I would be more of a center pasture kind of gal, but each to their own. Goats eat small leaves and flowers, fruits, and other plants, choosing the most nutritious food available. They like to eat select grasses and clover, but they prefer browse over grazing. Now, in case you are not familiar with the term browse, it does not refer to goats shopping. It refers to a species of plant, which often have thorns and small leaves tucked among woody stems. As you might guess from the bulletin cover, goats are agile, ruminating creatures, more agile than sheep and cows. They will stand on their hind legs and stretch up to browse tree leaves or throw their bodies against saplings to bring the tops within reach. Or in the case of the picture on the bulletin cover, they will stand on top of a sheep. And all this time you wondered why goats butted things. Now you know, it wasn't just for fun. It was to get the food. Goats have an inquisitive nature and a tolerance of bitter-tasting materials with a high tannin content. They will eat unpalatable weeds and wild shrubs, even those that may be poisonous, such as cherry or milkweed. Goats should avoid clippings of yew, azaleas, lily of the valley, and larkspur because they are poison to them. Now sheep. Sheep graze, but they're selective grazers, choosing plant parts which are of a higher quality and more digestible, say, than the herbage chosen by cattle. Sheep may be more selective than cows, but not more selective than goats. Sheep like grass, fescue, orchard grass, bluegrass, clover, and alfalfa, crop residues, wasteland forage, hay, and silage. They eat more browse than cattle, but they eat less browse than goats. They aren't as selective as goats, and they make better use of rough, steep hill pastures. Putting both of these animals in your pasture will effectively control unwanted vegetation within about 2 years. Just a little bit of info. That is, goats eat weeds, people. You don't need that Roundup. Get a goat. Remember, the goats will actively select major weeds at particular stages of growth. The goat is capable of stunting tree growth and prevents the regeneration of forests, so their foraging should be managed closely. You want them grazing in places where the regrowth of brush and trees is not desirable. Finally, here it is. Goats don't like to get wet. They aren't as tolerant of wet and cold as sheep and cattle because they're leaner and they have a thinner fat layer. A wet goat can easily become sick. Make sure your goat has easily accessible shelter at night. That's why the goats and the sheep are separated. One needs a house, the other one doesn't. So, these two innocent four-legged creatures have been placed in the center of the judgment of nations story, and I can't for the life of me figure out why one is worse than the other. One has been maligned, and the other has been lauded. They are separated at night as a matter of course for reasons maybe lots of folks never knew, and sheep herders probably had to learn the hard way. So, if you look at the front of the bulletin, what's the story there? What's going on? Any thoughts? I figure there are a lot of people who are going to think immediately, well, that goat's trying to get in on the sheep's back. Right? Trying to get in on the sheep's back. Or the sheep is just too dumb to figure out what's going on. Or their buddies, or their friends, and they don't want to be separated. What's that story? Matthew's treatise on separating the sheep and goats is just another warning, believe me, it's just another warning to everyone who has ears to hear, to be watchful, to be prepared, and to invest themselves in ministry to the world while you have time and gifts. It carries the same message as the two different parables that I preached on, the one that I preached last week and the one that I preached the week before that. Be prepared and invest yourself. The scholars who differ on who the human beings are and who are represented by the sheep and the goats will say that Matthew's message carries a specific warning to those who are outside of the Jewish cult, as well as being words of assurance to the disciples who are listening. For they will be Jesus Christian missionaries out in the world, bringing the message of good news and converting people to the way. Those who are helpful to Christ's messengers because they travel light and have nothing, are poor, hungry, and thirsty. Those who care for them when they are in prison for the work that they are doing, those persons, whether pagan or Christian, because of their kindness to Jesus' disciples, will be rewarded. Those persons who aren't, well, they're going to get the tough end of the stick. It's a warning. It's Matthew's warning. The simple, very simple part of this story for each and every one of us is to say, this treatise speaks to me. This treatise calls me to be awake, alert, and conscious. This treatise calls me to invest myself in the world, to invest my gifts in the world, to become part of the ministry that offers help and healing and love and grace and neighborliness to absolutely everyone I meet. And if on a moment or a day when I'm just too tired to do it, when I'm too cranky to do it, then I call upon God and I say, please forgive me and give me another chance. That is who our God is. There is no God, in my opinion, that is going to throw us to the wolves. Remember, the shepherd is the one who will go after the one lost sheep. That one lost sheep. We have not but to confess being lost in a moment in time, and we will be found, and we will be renewed,
And we will be empowered again to invest ourselves as Christ calls us to invest. So whether you're a sheep or a goat, doesn't matter. Forage, adventure, graze, and ask for what you need from God.